take home from this panel. So yeah, I saw a very strong head nod from James over that. And I'm just curious, when, like, especially in a teaching environment, how do you deal with, like, you know, the unteaching, like, how do you address students that might be misogynistic or might be inappropriate towards other improvisers? How do you address that?
Well, that's a great question. So first of all, I'll talk about, like, with adults, just to sort of finish, there was something I was thinking I wanted to say, so I'm going to say it real quick and I'm going to. So I feel like, there are people who improvise for lots of different reasons. And some people improvise because for the first time they're able to let out all the stuff that they've been keeping in. And that's what they want to do. And they don't want to be told not to do that. And their improv will be unentertaining and frightening for people to watch. And they will find other people who like to improvise that way, and they will feel like brothers and sisters, and they will have a team that will be unentertaining and difficult to watch.
Terrify the country.
Yeah, and they could be in their team, and I don't have to be in it. So that's okay. And then, so then if I'm teaching somebody and I notice that misogynistic attitudes are coming out, or if I notice that if there's a pattern of behavior in a particular improviser that is worrying, then we start with the improv craft piece of it. So we start with talking to the other characters and saying sort of like, you know, what is a way that the rest of the group can support this situation, can sort of flesh it out so that way we can see it as a real thing that has consequences. But then I have, you know, like I remember there was one particular set of a young group that I was coaching where that particular night there were 4 guys and 1 young woman performing. And the guys got carried away and they kept on putting the woman in a lower status role. And she kept on initiating in high status roles and kept on being brought down. And then there were some scenes that were played honestly, but more than one scene where there was a couple where the male was dominating the female in really uncomfortable ways. And so we talked about it afterwards. I said, you know, when we perform together, we're an ensemble, we're a team, we have to support each other. Fellas, we started by talking to the female actor. And so I said, how was that set for you? And she was like, I did not enjoy that set very much. And I said, well, tell us more about it. And she said, well, I just feel like I ended up playing the same character a lot. And I said, it's interesting because I noticed that you didn't initiate the same character each time. You know, there were times when you tried to play different characters. Why do you think it is that you ended up playing the same characters? And she was like, I don't really know. And I was like, well, I think I know. And so this is one of the things that like you can do when you work with younger performers that you have to be more careful with when you're working with older performers. I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but there is the convention of the teacher, right? I'm their teacher. I taught them improv, and so I can say, fellas, here's why I think this happened, and I don't want you to do it anymore. And I can take a much more authoritarian tone with them than I would with the team that I was coaching. That are not older improvisers. And they, you know, I'm actually kind of in a bit of as an educator right now, I'm sort of experiencing sort of like this is super interesting, a sort of a crisis of authority right now. Like, you know, how appropriate is it for me to really be like, don't do this, do this, that kind of thing, whatever. We can get into that some other time. But I flexed that muscle in that moment because I was sort of like, because these guys are talented and they are improvising in exciting ways, and they come from backgrounds that are underrepresented in our performance improv scene, not just in Minneapolis, but in the country right now. I want them to be the professional improvisers that bring our community forward, so I don't want them to be playing that way. So, yeah.
And Mike, can you speak to working with older students?
Yeah, well, it's kind of along the lines of what James is saying. I noticed that a lot in a couple classes that I was teaching where the woman in the group would make some type of declaration, and then almost immediately the guy was finding a way to like have the status be above, you know what I mean? And it was interesting too, like with some of the things that they would say, like how their mindset was just even like referring to you as mom, or you know what I mean? Was like, no, but do you know what I'm saying? Like that was enough for them to be like, now I'm the one sort of in charge. It was almost the exact same conversation. I noticed that this declaration kept getting made And then each and every time, you guys found a way to try to shift the status, as opposed to just having a scene. There had to be, it felt like there had to be a power play each time.
Are people receptive to that?
Yeah.
Like, were your students, in both cases, were your students fairly receptive in recognizing
Yeah.
what they were doing?
Because I find that if you, and I think everybody probably does, right? If you start, if you create a classroom where conversation can happen after a montage or after a scene off of really basic stuff, like, how come the fridge kept moving? You know what I mean? And like, let's talk about why the fridge is never in the same spot. You know, about like really basic, simple stuff that no one can really be offended about. Like, because I forgot where it was. Then you can kind of like, there was a fridge, I was panicking. I thought we were at a zoo. And then, but you know what I mean? So you start off creating that kind of environment with the class so that when you get to this other stuff, it'd be like, hey, we've created sort of a connection here. We're both adults. Here's what I'm noticing. Did you see this? And then, not to put you on the spot, but were you seeing this as well? And before I even ask those questions, I ask, how did you guys feel about that scene? You know what I mean? Just in case they were like, I didn't notice any of that. And everything was fine. You know, and then even if that's what they say, I'll be like, well, here's what I noticed.
Yeah.
And I've lucked out in that I've had very, very, very few occasions where it turned into a weird confrontation where that person just sort of refused to see that. You know what I mean? They were like, I've had it where they were like, well, I didn't think I was doing that. I'm still not 100% sure I was, but, and they said, but I respect that you guys saw that and you saw that, and I'm going to try to be more aware of it. You know, and in some ways, if I don't feel like there's any kind of like real threat going on, like, that's enough for that class. Okay, cool. Let's just be aware of it. Did I answer that?
Yeah.
I probably didn't.
Yeah, you did. And then I have one very short question because I want time for questions from the audience too. But I do know some people who will refuse to see improv because they've experienced it before and they saw something that was racist or sexist or involved sexual violence or was misogynistic. And I'm curious about what you might say to those who believe that improv inherently needs to be that way, and also if you feel like improv can be something that can empower people against those things.
Nope. I'm just kidding. Wait.
No comment.
I'll try to, I don't know, most of the people I know who've seen improv have seen me do improv, but honestly, I don't, or they've seen me do it a couple times, and if something like, you know, their context is such that like they haven't had that. I think it's the same thing as with stand-up, because I've gone through phases where I've been like, oh, I'm anti-stand-up, because it's all just rape, and it's like, there's always a counterexample. So for improv, I'll try to like locate, luckily because Huge Theater is here, there are so many shows during the week that you can pick one that you're like, well, I know that that's a good bet, and try to encourage someone like I think like we can all acknowledge like, yeah, that totally happens, and like explain the elements of improv craft that allow that to happen sometimes because it's collaborative and unscripted, but that there are some really there are some shows that have a lot of like insightful, compassionate, like smart, snarky improv that will like change your view, and then if they don't want to come, then they just miss all the improv. But I feel like there's always a good example of something. Like there are ensembles that I would trust as representatives. So maybe you can like Indiana Jones switch the crappy example for like this other good show. Instead.
It's interesting because like we at the student union we host a show called Stage Match, and for a lot of people that's their first time on stage. And just looking at it from a different perspective, we just kind of like we just say like, remember, this is going to be some people's first exposure to improvisation. You know what I mean? And this is going to sound a little bit like, oh, so honor that. But in a way, honor that. Like, this is going to be people's first experience with it. So I'm not saying worry about having the greatest set of your life. Don't have that kind of pressure on yourself. But just be aware of what you're doing and how you're presenting yourself on stage, because if it feels like it's a friendly, comfortable environment, people are going to be willing to come back and see it more. So even if you're like, oh my God, that improv scene, what was I even doing? But they saw that there was some sort of love in the environment and there was respect in the environment, I really do think that translates to the audience, and I really do think they see that. And I think they see the opposite too, and they probably feel that even more. Like, ooh, that dude, what was that guy? Did he have to be in charge of everything? You know what I mean?
Keep moving the fridge.
You know what? Come on, guys! Martian alien! But so I look at it from that perspective. That's been something that's been really interesting for me, is that show, because it's cool to see a bunch of people who are doing it for the first time and noticing that interaction and that dynamic with the audience. So
I feel like that's a growing pain in the awareness of our art form. You know what I mean? Like, I imagine that when stand-up comedy first got started, there were people who were like, I don't like stand-up because I saw one stand-up and that must be what it's like. And that's just how that is. You know, like every art form has gone through that stage where people see an example of it and then they generalize it. It's what we do. It's how we come to understand things. And so, yeah, like it's a great comparison to stand. I mean, for every Daniel Tosh, there's a Tig Notaro, there's a Paul F. Tompkins, you know. And for every group that does something horrific that you see on stage, there's a Splendid Things. And so I feel like, yeah, it's just about sort of going like, oh, you didn't like that? Well, I can recommend this, and I will come with you and buy you dinner if you hate it.
And do we have any questions? Well, first of all, thank you guys so much. I saw this hand raised back here first. Hannah.
Okay, so you guys all gave different kind of advice about like how to deal with when things are going wrong in a group, and I think it's really valid to say like read the group or don't perform with those people. But those situations come up, I feel like, more often than we're even really giving credit to. And for me, if I just kept running away from it, I would only end up being in groups with like I would just only perform with the Minneapolis or like be with just really sensitive men. Like only. So the bigger question is then how do I bring up those ideas to men who I do respect, like in a lot of different ways, and who I consider my friend, but on stage some of their shit comes out directed at me. How do I bring it up backstage or, you know, outside of the context of notes even, and like really facilitate a discussion that they may never have been exposed to before, without feeling like I'm being like, this is what you're doing wrong,
Right.
you need to fix.
I think you should take my workshop this afternoon.
I'm taking it tomorrow.
Good. Go, you go.
I have found, like, in certain situations, not just with what you're saying, but like group dynamics in general, sometimes bringing in a coach for a session, you know what I mean, and having another outside eye looking at it diffuses the potential for a big fight wherein then nothing gets solved for the next set. You know what I mean? Because here's an outside eye who not only saw what you were talking about, but maybe saw some other things. Now, let's diffuse that and talk about it a little bit. I'm not saying that that's perfect, and I'm not saying that this necessarily solves it, but I've tried to do that before in other sort of situations, sometimes in a sketch comedy situation, just to take a different look at the writing session. If that doesn't work, then I've just been willing to have the flat out, this is gonna turn into a big argument. It's important to me enough that we're gonna kind of blow it up to see if it can get rebuilt. I don't know if that helps. But.
I'm the wrong person to ask that question because I would have you only improvise with the Minneapolis Insensitive Men. And I'm being serious because I feel like one way to communicate to improvisers who are misogynistic and violent on stage, that's not okay, is to not do improv with them. I don't know, maybe that's a little too hardline, but I hate doing improv like that, and so I don't. As soon as I realize, oh, that's how you play, I'm not gonna be in a show with you anymore. And I understand, like, that's kind of a hardline position, but that's what I do, and so I'm the wrong person to ask.
Well, I think I agree with both of you. I think with what Mike is saying, you just got to be careful with the coach that you bring in and make sure that it's the right fit for the person who's got the issues. Make sure that it's someone who feels like a facilitator to them and not someone who they are going to feel scolded by.
Yeah.
So don't invite me. Because it's not a good fit. So you should invite Mike. But with what James is saying, That is also what I've realized is that sometimes that's a luxury that students don't have because you're stuck in a student showcase. Your performance partners are chosen for you a lot of times. Or if you're trying to get stage experience, sometimes you have to say yes to groups. If you want to be on stage, you have to make that choice of like, I don't 100% trust these people, but for me, it is important to be on that stage, so I am going to take a calculated risk. And that doesn't feel good. I think that we could develop as a community more like a shared understanding of that phenomenon, and like maybe just know that like you have allies out there that it's okay to talk about, not to like shit talk one particular person and like blacklist them so they're never worked with again.
No, do it.
But do it. But that's what I would like to tell you to do. But don't do that. Instead, like maybe the more we talk about it, the more people will be willing to put groups together that are where there's a network of trust, so that there are more stage opportunities, so that you don't have to just, because sometimes the most ambitious people who are creating all these opportunities for themselves aren't necessarily the easiest to work with. So that maybe it's not on us to fix that, but there is something that we could do to create more opportunities.
Get them here somehow.
I'll be transcribing this entire panel and mailing it to people in paper form. But no, like if we're all conscious of that like there need to be more stage opportunities so that people don't have to take that risk. People don't have to choose to perform with groups just because they're dominating the stage that's available. Like, I'm not saying like let them have the stage that you want to be on and go find another stage. I'm saying like find a time when you will be on that stage in a safe group.
Okay, any other questions?
It's not a question, I have something to say. Can I say it?
Yeah.
We always talk about, Hannah, like the Minneapolis Improv and how like everyone's so kind and polite and whatever. And Hannah, you said performers that you respect, that you really, maybe look up to or whatever, are doing this, and they probably don't realize that they're doing it. So with both of these things, like doing like courageous improv and having courageous conversations, like it's as a community establishing a place where we can have, for me it's like simple feedback after a show,
Right.
instead of being like great show, high five, to be like, you know what, that was awesome, or that fucking sucked, or whatever, like to really just allow that kind of conversation to happen. And in that same way, I want to encourage you to have it's a courageous conversation to be like, you know what, that made me really uncomfortable. I still really like you. You're a good person. You just need to know that, like, by the way, what you just did made me uncomfortable. You know what I mean? And that's not saying they're a bad person. That's not saying that you're never going to improvise with them again. But to really, like, encourage as a community to have, like, courageous, base conversations,
Yeah.
That's all.
And then we have time for one more super quick question. I saw Casey in back.
Oh, well, I was just going to say thank you, because I think it seems like a really easy concept to just have a conversation, but in improv it's really difficult because you feel like you are talking to that person's self. Innermost. Yeah, you're telling them, if you give them a comment, that you're commenting on them, and I think this is such a great, healthy conversation to say, no, I'm saying that action, that choice you made, not you. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
I just wanted to add, we should have a challenge this year for our educators. Come up with improv games that can help teach us how to recognize bad behaviors and how to address it when we see it. And maybe make that part of the improv training.
Oh, that's a great idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
In 101.
Yeah.
I'll make that an explicit
Okay.
part of it.
Yeah, really, really quick question.
It just occurred to me, okay, so the nun with the touching the vagina scene, what if it was like, I'm gonna touch your penis, if it was the male character, like, what is the, because I know there's so much stigma around the female and, like that, what we're talking about, but like, so what if, like, is there something around that? Is that a bigger issue that maybe we don't have time to talk about?
Yeah, I feel.
Like, as a male performer.
Yeah.
To me, it's a level of comfort.
Yeah.
So if I don't know or trust that person who I'm improvising with, and they pulled that move on me, I would, as that character, I would react in the same way that I talked about had it been the original scenario.
Still a
To me-
sex-related boundary.
Yeah, to me
cross.
it's a boundary cross no matter what.
But there was, there was some mention of the audience will thank you for, taking care of that character in the next scene, for example, to come in and be like, what? So is there that awareness or that level that we need to have,
Maybe because of that difference, because of the gender swap. I mean, hypothetically, it could be a chance to map one issue onto the other because they are a little bit different. There's a different cultural context.
Right.
There's a little bit of a power difference between men and women in Western society. So the difference is in there. Like if you mapped one onto the other, I mean, people are going to think about that just the same way that it occurred to you. So there are opportunities for satire within that. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Yeah.
We're 1 minute over time, so I'm so sorry. So anyway, I just wanted to thank our panelists so much for this thoughtful and I've been asked to tell everyone that you need to take your food that you put out at brunch because we don't want a bunch of old brunchy leftovers here. So a little bit of a reminder, take your food home. Up next we have workshops happening.
Yeah.
Hannah?
I don't know a thing about them. You're looking at me like I know. I don't know.
She doesn't know. Okay.
I'm not sure where they're going to take
well,
place.
we have workshops happening and you can learn more about those. There's still a few spots, I think. Do you know if there's any spots left?
There are 2 spots left for 99 Problems, Hannah, and about 6 or 7 spots for If It Makes You Happy to Chill.
Perfect. So
And then there's some spots, there's some spots tomorrow.
okay.
Stop
Perfect.
from-
So if you haven't signed up for a workshop yet, you still have a chance. So anyway, thank you so much, everybody.